Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to Ed Up on the Ed Up Experience podcast, where we make education your business. This is Dr. Joe Salustio back with you here on another episode as we've returned recently from our 3-day recording I don't know what to call it, extravaganza at Zanzibar Jam. Elvin and I recorded about 20 episodes in a 3-day period. Lost my voice. It was fantastic, but a vodka soda helped get it back. Elvin was supposed to go home. His flight got canceled. He ended up having to stay one extra day, but we made it and we're back here. I'm literally in my basement, but there's nothing stopping the Ed Up Experience from continuing, not even a new basement location. I literally feel, could I say it's almost like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates doing this from a garage, and I'm going to end up in some huge company. At least it feels that way. That maybe not what happens, but it feels like I'm starting over as I get back into this unfinished basement. But we have a lot of people and a lot of conversation that we still need to have, even though we are fast and furiously approaching episode 900 of the Ed Up Experience in less than 4.5 years, if you could believe it, including interviewing close to 300 college and university presidents all across the world. And then, of course, CEOs, deans, administrators, all across higher ed. And one of my frequent co-hosts is back with me yet again. I still, to this day, will not get his title right because I forgot to ask him what it was again before we started, but here he is. He's Douglas Carlson. He is the head of partnerships for Lead Squared. You saw there was probably something else in there that I missed, but I got most of it, right, Douglas?
I mean, it's too long at this point. You know, what does it even mean at this point? Strategy and business development, all these things. I help companies connect to companies, so I'm more than happy to do that.
Can I introduce you that way from now on? This is Douglas Carlson. He helps companies connect to companies.
Perfect. Yeah,
that's like way easy. Yeah. We'll work on it. We'll still work on it. We're going to get our guest in right now because she's got a lot to say, and there's a lot going on around her right now. And we'll see. She brings energy. I'll tell you that right now. Here she is. She is Dr. Nancy Hubbard. She's Dean of the College of Business at Lynchburg University. Nancy, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. How are you doing?
Is the University of Lynchburg or Lynchburg University?
It is University of Lynchburg.
See, yep. I'm already batting zero, Nancy, but we're going to fix it.
That's okay. We're flexible.
How are you and what's going on, Nancy? Tell us, let's start here. Where is the University of Lynchburg? Who do you serve and how do you serve them?
Perfect. So we are in Lynchburg, Virginia, and we are one of 6 colleges in the town, which is pretty amazing for a university town this size to have 6 institutions.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So we serve everyone from high achieving students in Virginia all the way to students who academically are kind of, I'll say, I don't want to say middle of the road, because I think there's students who just need to meet their potentials and haven't really necessarily done that in high school. So students that would be cross-apping with, say, a James Madison, Radford, those are the students that we generally attract. Our top students that go to our Westover Honors College, they're UVA, UNC, Virginia Tech students. So really, really top drawer students.
So really you're serving what I like to call them the modern learner, somebody that is really finding their way through higher education. It's just not as easy as finding an elite institution for many students. They've got to feel their way through, find the right university, the right fit, the right affordability. Would that be accurate?
That is spot on. Couldn't have said it better.
Well, to say that we are in interesting times in higher education would be an understatement. Here's what we know, Nancy, and you know this. We probably have too many universities in the U.S., and there are some that are closing.
Absolutely. So what's happening and what I'm seeing is universities are downsizing or they're closing. And the University of Lynchburg is no different. We had a round of layoffs earlier, late end of last week. I'm not going to talk about them in specific. It's not really fair to the people involved or the university who doesn't have someone here to represent themselves. But what I find is that's really endemic of higher ed as a whole. I talked to the head of our accrediting body who contacted me when I posted something on Facebook, and he said that they've had 4 institutions close this year alone in their accreditation bracket. So it's happening a lot. And what it's interesting. So my background is a little strange. I was a management consultant for years before coming into higher ed. And Douglas, we should talk because I did my doctorate in mergers and acquisitions and implementation. So I'm all about the alliances and bringing people together. So I've restructured businesses all my life. So I did my doctorate at Oxford, taught there for a while, and then went into consulting. And happened to hit the merger wave of the early 90s and then mid 90s where everybody was combining. We called them Noah's Ark acquisitions, where you have one of everything and then you merge with someone else who's got one of everything, and then you got two of everything. And you know what? You don't need that many. You need one of everything. So you fire people. And so I have had I'm not going to say it's a privilege. Well, I will say it was a privilege. I had the privilege to do research in 5 companies that were extraordinarily different in the way they handled this. And then I had the privilege of working in about 30 companies and helping them over the years and how they maximize the right size for the organization, for the revenues they have coming in and for their strategic direction. So a lot of experience, most of it in Europe, Africa, Asia, not as much in the United States. But it's what I did. I fired people for a living, which is what I joke and tell people, which is horrible. But my goal was to make sure people were treated fair and with dignity for a strong business case. You don't do it because you're nice. You do it because you do better as an organization if you do that.
You know, Douglas, I'll pass it over to you, but I want to make one comment based on what you said, because, you know, the University of Lynchburg is going through that round of cuts, not unlike many universities that already have and many more that will.
Absolutely.
And you just wonder, one of the questions I've always had in my mind is how good or not are universities about doing something like this and communicating it internally and externally when you haven't had to do something like this before, or at least not in an environment, not in a media-rich environment where everybody's watching. Right? There's wrong ways and right ways to go about these types of things. What have you seen? What are you seeing?
That is such an insightful way to put it, because when I was doing this in the 90s through the 2000s, you didn't have Facebook or LinkedIn or the ability to just hit hundreds of people and influence them, thousands of people with a post, which really makes it far more complicated. So what I see generally in higher ed, both in strategy and in implementation, is you have a lot of people who their sole job has been in higher ed. They've never been out in the rest of the world. They've probably never experienced being laid off themselves, and they've probably never laid off anyone themselves. And with the best will in the world and the best intentions, they don't have that experience. And they're smart people and they think, I can do this. And it's really hard, even in industry, if you've never done something, to do it right the first time. And rather than call in reinforcements to get some help, they're smart people. They're like, I can do this. And then I find generally they care about their employees, they care about their students, they care about the whole experience. They just don't manage to get it right. And the thing that's really interesting in all of these, whether you're in higher ed or in business, let's say you are laying off 10% of your workforce, which is huge. Let's say most companies, you're going to lay off 5%. You've got 95% of your workforce staying with you. So if it does not come across as being handled well, 95% of the rest of your workforce, first of all, you've upset the 5% that's leaving, but then you've also upset the 95% who are staying and are now questioning whether or not they'll stay. And my research, the great thing about doing research in this rather than being a consultant, is I've seen real screw ups. And you learn a lot from watching someone really, really screw this up. It sounds
It's
horrible,
fuzzy math.
Yeah, exactly. And so you watch what happens when it's not handled well. And in addition to the 5% that you're laying off, you will lose between 10 and 15 further percent in attrition, as people have been horrified and said, hey, you don't value the organization. I think I'm going to look to go somewhere else. So I think that's a real issue in higher ed across the board. And to me, it's a concern, because you don't want organizations going out of business because their management tried to do something themselves and screwed it up. You really want people surviving that should survive. And I do think a lot of universities are going to go out of business.
I want to make one more point too, Douglas, sorry. And then you can take over. To your point, Nancy, maybe you're with somebody who's never had to make cuts before, or this is not, even if they had not maybe at a 10% level, which is massive. So I always wonder, as you're communicating, you're a dean. Most deans have not consulted with 90 worldwide businesses or however many you said. That's I mean, you're in the small minority of deans. If you're a dean, you have a budget, and your university comes to you and says, we have to cut by 10%. Is that 10% of your people? Is that 10% of your overall budget, including salary? Is it just salary? Is it just budget? Or is it for you to decide? So now I'm going to choose whether I'm cutting my budget, like professional development, or am I cutting my people? There's like formulas that have to take place that come from experience. So you know how to do those things, so you don't end up gutting something and you can't perform, right? There's a art, I hate to say it, but there's an art to expense realignment. And I don't know that we're equipped as an industry to handle it.
That is a great way to put it. Expense realignment. I'm going to have to write that down because that's fabulous.
That's what I tell Douglas every time I don't have him as a co-host. I said, Douglas, we're doing some podcast host realignment.
I understand.
It's complicated because what you don't want to do is impact the student experience.
Right.
Because then you're going to lose customers. And I call them customers, and people look at me and they're horrified. They are customers. And increasingly, as we move towards the alpha generation, which is coming up in 4 years, they really are customers. And they are very good at self-advocating. They're very good at, they've had Watson level computing at their fingertips since the day they were born. So if they don't know an answer, they'll go find it out, and they will really, advocate for themselves. So I think the idea is getting that sweet spot of making sure you don't damage the client experience, the student experience, but at the same time trying to rein in costs. So people are going to do this all sorts of different ways, and the smart ones will do it in a variety of ways. They'll say, where is the fat? Where can we inconvenience ourselves a little to save a significant amount of money? And there are all sorts of consulting graphs that you can use that, is this going to be a long-term fix? Is it a short-term fix? Is it a systems change? Et cetera. But the low-hanging fruit, which is another term consultants use all the time, that's easy to find. There's some areas where you can make significant savings, and to going to Douglas's area through collaboration with other partners. So you can have combined purchasing with other institutions. You can have consortium for where you share academic offerings. There's so many ways you can do this. I'm in a town with 6 universities. We should be doing more in terms of combined purchasing to get some purchasing power, things like that. So there are a lot of ways that people can do it that actually don't impact the student at all behind the scenes. But what I think a lot of institutions are finding is that their academic offerings are not necessarily what students are interested in right now. And it may be a fad, but it may not be a fad. And I'll give you an example. When I first went to Oxford to do my master's degree, which was 10,000 years ago, we rode our horses to campus virtually. They had a really significant number of classics professors. So, Latin and Greek. And as time went on and these professors retired, they just didn't replace them. So by the time I left, there were less than a half a dozen. So we went from numbers somewhere, I believe, in the 30s. Then by the time I left Oxford eventually, which again was a significant time later, they were down to a few number. They did it all through attrition. The only way you can do that is if you're planning way far in advance and you're doing that level of HR planning. Most institutions don't do that. They haven't needed to do that.
Right.
And now they need to start doing this stuff. But the problem is what you're seeing now is a knee-jerk reaction saying, oh my gosh, the pandemic was a disaster for this. The cliff is coming up next year. College presidents have a really tough time on managing all this stuff that's coming at them quickly. Most of them are lifelong academics. Most of them don't have a background in change management where you're in communication, where you're having to firefight like this. And from what I know, my friends who are presidents, they say this is incredibly exhausting. but it's now part of the job of what you've got to do as a college president. And, you either learn the skills to do it yourself, or you hire in the skills to help you navigate this course.
Tell it like it is.
Yeah.
Douglas, she opened the door for you twice and I closed it, but now it's all you.
I know. Well, and so one of the things that strikes me, and forgive me, I'm going to make a comparison that'll be interesting to see if you think it's apt or not. But one of the interesting things is I've spent a lot of my career in the tech sector, in and out of education, higher education, for-profit, not-for-profit. And what's interesting about the tech sector, similarly to higher education, is it just had this meteoric, it can only go up into the right rise. And employees have, at least in the big companies, have wonderful benefits. You're treated well. You're told you're special. You're family. All these things sort of ring true on both sides of the fence. And it was really interesting watching my friends and colleagues, especially when some of the rounds of layoffs. And in fairness, on average, tech is not hugely down, but there were very notable, very public layoffs. Some of which would be interesting to done well, some of which aren't. But I think one of the interesting sentiments from folks were this just being aghast that a for-profit company could lay people off. And I think higher education is having this same kind of piece. Right. And it shouldn't be surprising, right? This wave hasn't just come up. All these things are happening. And I think my hypothesis is hopefully what this will do is have folks take the need for change a lot more seriously and move more quickly. And so a little bit of a kind of a two-part question is, one is, do you see the same things with kind of some of those interesting similarities between for-profit entities and not-for-profit in that, at least that sense? And then two, is there maybe some hope that folks will be a little bit maybe not serious, but maybe more action-oriented, move a little bit quicker, be a little bit quicker to kind of, take the sacred cow, that sort of thing?
That's the multi-million-dollar question right there. So on the tech industry one, I see the similarities. We're family. We've worked together. I mean, we have employees here who've worked here for 35 years.
Oh, sure.
And when you have that level of family care, if there is a shock like this, it is devastating, because also when you have professors who have tenure means you're never going to lose your job. And I don't know another industry in the world where that is the case. And even as at KPMG, where I worked, you have partners, if you're not performing, you get the axe. And so this idea that you are given these freedoms and you take a lower salary generally, certainly in my area, in order to have these freedoms, to have a lovely working environment, you get to really do a wonderful job with students and enjoy yourself. But then, but you have a job for life. And then all of a sudden you have 40, faculty members, or 100 or 200 or however departments you cut, and you say, hey, we're cutting departments, by the way, even though you have tenure, you're going to lose your job. It's never enters a faculty member's radar.
Sure.
So that's the first one. And in the second one, I find the enrollment cliff fascinating because, COVID snuck up on people because that wasn't expected. Yeah. The enrollment cliff, we've known about this for 15 years. I mean, these kids it's not like the kids are born 3 years ago. They were born 16, 17, 18 years ago. We knew this was coming, and yet still people did not prepare. So I don't think it has been in the mindset of academic leadership that it's all, they've been raised in an environment where there's always more the next year. We'll just raise prices 5%. Sure. We'll just raise prices 3%. We'll be fine. And now all of a sudden, smokes, we're not. So I think it's going to take a real realignment, and I hope people plan for the future. But if they had, they would have been doing this already 5 years ago. And again, COVID, I know screwed things up, but they would have done it years ago. And so I'm not really that hopeful that that this will be a wake-up call for people to plan. It may be, but I don't think they have the skills to do it. They just don't know how to do this because they've never had to do this in their entire careers.
This is lunacy.
Well, and I'm wondering how this shakes out. And it's I think a lot of folks are very hesitant to make too many analogies with higher education, specifically in higher education. And I actually very much agree. it is a unique entity in so many ways. With that said, it is not, it's still subject to the laws of gravity and microeconomics and macro for that matter. If you have a crystal ball, and I know you have a specialty consultant background, so I hope you have some thoughts on this. Where does the industry as a whole shake out? Certainly some universities will close. There's no doubt about that. But how do you think this kind of shakes out? What do you think the landscape looks like in a crystal ball 5 or 10 years from now?
Wow. So, the cynic in me, and I'm fairly cynical at times. It's either adapt or die.
Yeah.
And again, if you have a brand name of a top 40 institution in this country, or an endowment that allows you to skate along with a minimal number of students,
Yeah.
endowments really create an unlevel playing field. There are institutions that are sitting on $2 billion endowments. Guess what? They don't have to do anything for a long time and they'll be fine. But then you literally have hundreds, if not thousands, that are sitting at a 200 million or less. And they really are starting to feel the heat. And if they're not the ones that have and of course there's a strong correlation, high endowment, great brand name. If you're an Ivy or a near Ivy, you're going to be fine. It's the rural liberal arts-based colleges that don't have graduate programs that are really struggling, and then other ones now that are kind of lost their way. There are so many ways that people can innovate, but they need to see what are other people around the world doing? What can we do to differentiate ourselves? And how can we prepare ourselves to better serve our customers? And things like multidisciplinary majors. One of the things we've done here is we have created a whole slew of multidisciplinary majors. And I think one of the reasons why in the College of Business, we're at record enrollment for us. We're doing great in the College of Business. And part of it, I think, is business as an entity is multidisciplinary, and students like that. They want to say, I'll say to students, I never say, what are you majoring in? I say, what do you want to do with your life? And they'll say, I want to go into business. Very few students would say, I want to be a philosopher. Now, does that mean they shouldn't take philosophy? Heck no. They are the best writers in the world. They have phenomenal critical thinking skills. But it's just in that respect, it's kind of a packaging nuance. But also, I think we need to look at this from the customer's eyes. They want personalized learning. They want it when they want it, how they want it, and at a price that they want it. They want subjects that they want. And again, as the generation Alpha generation comes in more, this is going to become more of an issue. And I think they see the world in big pictures, and we're still teaching them in silos. So I think we really have to change. And the ones that do will survive. The ones that are stuck in their ways and don't figure out how to better cater to students will fall along the wayside. And I think it's going to be a significant number. And until this sounds horribly tough, but until the number of universities falls and we have an oversupply of colleges, again, it's going to be higher ed. I call it higher ed survivor. It's going to be higher ed survivor, where people are seeing they're trying to kill each other, or Hunger Games, academia style. And we're all going to be trying to kill each other, trying to get to the same students. And the way to differentiate it is either you have great, and they don't care about facilities anymore. This group coming up, they want, so they don't need Michelin starred restaurants, because on their campuses, they saw how their parents, millennials, struggled with debt. They'd say, I want good education. I want something that's going to get me a career, a path to my career. But they're going to say, I want to play sports in college. So you want a good sports team. I want a phenomenal music experience. So they'll go to a school that has that. Whatever suits them, that drives them. I want really great internship programs. They'll gravitate towards that. So you need some kind of unique selling point to cater to these students to differentiate yourselves.
100%.
Well, and I'm so glad you brought it back, because I think part of our conversation has been like, whoa, the world is really shaken up. And it is, right. And I think we need to take that seriously. And The other piece, though, is like, what's the point of all this? The students and educating, for our point of view, the U.S. population, from your point of view as well, especially being in, being at Oxford, and so you were in at a school internationally in Russia as well. Like, we have an obligation, or at least this is my feeling, as the U.S. to continue to lead education, and that's going to mean a lot of different things. And I think you hit on some of the really key points with students. And I think for me, one of the things that's a little bit hard is professors are a great asset, and certainly staff is a cost to universities, but it's not the big driver that sunk a lot of folks. It's the infrastructure. It's the, I just Googled all the schools with whirlpools, and it's just like unbelievable.
Right. It's so true.
5-star restaurants. But to your point, that's actually not what students want. So how do we go from the change back to the change management? How do we go from these institutions that are just like built with these beautiful pillars, and in some cases literally canning pools, to actually what students want, and frankly what's going to be important for them to learn to be part of the next generation that's leading the country, leading our job market, et cetera?
That's fascinating. And I think at the time people are saying, hey, let me differentiate so I can attract students on, and I'm not going to say on a superficial level, but on an area that may get them to go there. And I think now, we need to ask students, what do they want? What do they want? And if you know the student body, you'll know exactly what they want. And then it's an ability to sell that to the student. So that, and I go back to the number of times I've heard friends, and I because I do a lot of work with the NCAA, I come across other D3 schools a lot. I do a lot of national work there. And the number of colleagues that'll say, we don't know what we stand for anymore. So if you don't know what you stand for, how are you going to sell that to a student? The student says, why should I go here? And you're like, well, I don't know what we stand for, so I can't tell you. So I think it goes back to figure out what your core competency is, figure out what you do better than any other school around, or certainly in your region or your application pool, and maybe a national pool. Figure out what you do best. And that's what you're telling, and then support that as you tell students about that message. And I think that's one. And the other is really figure out what your strengths are. And it may be your strengths are something that you don't even realize. And I'll give you an example. One of the things I really push with our students is we have, until recently, and it's being reorganized now, but we have a student managed investment fund that is top notch. We have students that get incredible experience with it. And that's going great. We also had, and again, it's being reorganized now, but a career and professionalism center where students were taught soft skills, because the NACE findings are students need soft skills because they don't get them in a classroom necessarily, and employers want them. So it's things like conflict resolution, critical thinking skills. They want verbal communication, written communication. This is all stuff you get in a great education. And they want leadership, but things like conflict resolution, that's something you can teach. And the way that we can do this outside a classroom, we can do it in a classroom, but it's possible to do outside a classroom if you have great centers that can help support students. And then you sell the students on this, is we're giving you the skills to go out and be successful in the workforce.
Nancy, you said something that I thought was right on, and that was the concept of identity crisis. I think this is, if you want to look at something that's underpinning cuts right now, it's, for me, you can't, you ever heard, we can't be all things to all people.
Yes.
Well, which people will you be the thing to?
Right.
Who are they? And if you can't define exactly who those people are, then you can't properly invest the money that you do have. So when you go and you make, let's just call a big gut of 10% across your institution, are you cutting your online and your on-ground residential at the same rate? So you're really not investing in either. Are you going to move resources from one to the other? Are you going to invest in eliminating some of your deferred maintenance so that you can sell your dorms and have more revenue coming in there? So I have seen in schools that I've worked with, and I've talked to so many presidents, that the cuts, when institutions are looking at cuts, they're very general, and they don't have a I don't know if strategy is the right word, but an intent
It
to
is.
get to the, yeah, maybe, but the intent to get to the point that you're talking about, which is what are we really good at? And so if we're going to cut all of this over here, we need to cut more from those things so that we can fund this one thing.
Amen.
That comes with a lot of, I don't know, you have to look inside yourself to figure out who you serve. But that's also dangerous because you may have to decide that you serve less people than you do now. So then you got to go to the board and say, we're actually going to decrease our student enrollment and revenue. So there's just so many conversations that probably are not happening. Sweeping cuts, they're going to have to do again. You're going to have to do them again in a couple of years. You know?
Right. And you are absolutely right. And I think this idea that colleges have kind of grown in a proactive way. They've just been reactive, like, hey, let's have these students. Hey, let's do this. Let's do this. And they don't really think about what they're doing, the administration, because now at this point, they're desperate. So there's like, oh my gosh, we have an opportunity. Let's just take it. And rather than say, is this opportunity appropriate for our unique selling points, our core competency, and our strategy? And you really need, and then that all falls back onto your mission and values. Why are we here? What are we really good at? What are we actually selling to students? What are they getting from us? What is our value? And I'm using terms that consultants use rather than academics. What is our value proposition to a student? If you are 17 years old and you're thinking of coming to college and you're going to go to, Elmer Fudd College, what does Elmer Fudd give you in terms of a value proposition? We at Elmer Fudd will give you, and I've just aged myself, haven't I, by using Elmer Fudd as an example.
100%.
But what, if you come here, this is what you'll get. And if you have any business environment, that's what you do. If you have, in any business in the world. And I have worked with colleagues who say, stop calling higher ed a business. And it's a not-for-profit business. You're going to be putting any surplus you have back into programs and what you offer students, but you have to be, and not all programs have to make money. That's another thing, is they don't all have to be profitable, but there have to be some that are profitable enough to support the ones that aren't profitable. And then you get this holistic basket of saying, this is what our value proposition is to a potential student. And that's a lot of stuff that college presidents have never had to do.
Yeah, it's going to be,
have the training to do it.
Yeah, right. But you have to do it now. And one of the other bits, Nancy, that I've seen too, and talked to many presidents and seen it. I've actually seen this and experienced it on a receiving end of schools that are closing, is this lack of proactivity for president or board to say, okay, we're probably 2 years out from closing, 2.5 years out. Are we going to say, we think we can turn this in a year, and we haven't been able to do it for the last 10, but we think we're going to turn it in a year. By the time that year is gone, your $50 million endowment turns to $30 million. You don't have the assets to run your operating budget. And now you go to try to seek a suitor, and there's nobody out there that wants to take you. And that's why a lot of schools have closed, is because that lack of proactivity, maybe at a board level. Does a nonprofit board say, we'd rather close than lose our identity to somebody else? I mean, I just wonder what those conversations sound like. Because there is that, right? You have to forecast several years in the future to say, we're okay now, but we're not going to be okay, so let's merge.
Right. And it's so fascinating that you say that. I spoke at a conference about a month and a half ago with this, and one of the speakers was a university system that had acquired a business, a college. And there are a couple of reasons. One, and looking at this from the M&A person, that, when I gleefully did this for a living, endowments screw up everything because it gives you a longer lifeline than you really should have.
Fool's gold.
Right. Perfect. So what does the institution have that a suitor would want? Does it have a set of majors and faculty that have expertise in an area? Do they have a beautiful piece of land in the middle of a major city like Boston, Wolford? Do they have IT systems that will help us enter a new market? Phoenix, buying, or Purdue buying
Kaplan.
Kaplan. So that gives them a channel of distribution, and Purdue had the money to develop this themselves, but they said, if I buy Kaplan, I'm in there 5 years faster, and they've already got a system and the bugs are out of it. So
they also said, if we try to do it internally, our inertia is going to screw it up. So let's go bolt it on instead.
Exactly. And that's a smart strategic decision. But what happens is, I think it's, I teach ethics, and one of the things I see a lot in frauds is people say, we can turn it around. We'll turn it around before they ever know we've done it. And so, I'm just going to take a little bit more because I just need a little bit more, and then we'll make it right. And that's what I'm seeing in exactly the description of what you described is the boards. And I'll talk about boards in a minute, because I think a lot of this falls on boards, is, we just need a little more time and we can turn this around. If you haven't turned it around in 10 years, why are you think you're going to turn it around now when we are at a crisis across the country with the economic cliff? Or in this case, FAFSA, or in the case of COVID, it's why do you think if your management could not turn this around during smooth sailing, do you think they can do it now?
Wow. A lot there. Douglas.
Yeah. You need like a minute to almost unpack all of that. Because I just think
Sorry,
there's so
I'm ranting.
Yeah, no, I don't even think that's the case. I think, it's funny. I'm very fortunate that I've done a number of podcasts with Joe. And I think this has been probably the most relevant that, I promote this quite a bit, but like any of my colleagues in higher education, like this is the one I'm going to slide across the table. If you haven't listened to this one and thought about this, and fortunately, most of the colleagues I've talked to, this is very top of mind.
Douglas is just trying to tell you this, Nancy.
You just made the list.
And I'm just trying to imagine the landscape of what comes in and changes. So like a couple of things, I'm really excited to get to board. So I think maybe this will be my bridge to your board conversation. Like what are the mechanisms that come in? So I could, there's a world in which I see kind of on the opposite side, like Purdue is obviously purchased capital, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But are there private equity funds that come in with the intention of funding these schools? Probably not. There's a lot of really expensive infrastructure, but in some places you mentioned there are those assets that come in. The problem with that is I think there's a lot of political headwinds to that. So that may be one answer. Another answer is certainly institutions acquiring other institutions, which as long as they're well-run, it's a good strategy. I think that makes sense. Like fewer institutions and kind of back to your point of, bigger and better group purchasing. Right. But I'm wondering if there's kind of add on to that, and let's get to boards. If there are other logical options that you're seeing come in that could be maybe any of those, maybe one we haven't mentioned at all, what potentially could come in and help these struggling schools?
Well, to me, one of the things that I've really enjoyed is coming up with new curriculum, thinking about what's going to happen 5 years down the road, and coming up with multidisciplinary stuff where you can fill niches. And if you fill enough niches, you actually have a strategy. And but that requires people to do a lot of market analysis of what's going on in their application pool and finding gaps that don't exist. So we had one here that we developed a digital media marketing major. It was very unusual because you didn't have to be a marketing major to do it. You could do the minor, and that's really grown and been and thrived. Actuarial science is another that we developed here. We don't have that many majors in it, but we had to create 0 new classes. So what we did is just bundled what we had. Yep. And there are kids, and my goal is not to cannibalize other existing majors. My goal is always to say, I want to create something that a student was not getting and came here specifically to take on an academic front. So one we just finished doing was equestrian sport management. We have a national champion in equestrian, a three-peat in D3. We have a superb sport management program, and we combined the two and created a handful of new classes, which means one new major will pay for it. In our first year, we'll already have 5. So, finding those little niches, but that requires a certain mindset to say, I have the skills to go out and see what's happening in the rest of the market, do a market analysis, and then create the programming that would fill that hole. And I'll tell you, the equestrian sport management took 2 years of getting buy-in. It was a brutally hard and long process. We just got it done. Another thing that I think is an interesting way to look at it is to look at what other colleges are doing in other parts of the world. So I'll give you one of my favorites, which is the African Leadership University. I've led a study abroad there. They're based in Rwanda and Mauritius. What they have done is put together a portfolio of majors that are based on the challenges and the opportunities facing Africa. So it's really multidisciplinary because again, a kid doesn't come in and say, I want to be an economist. They come in and they say, I want to battle corruption in Africa. I want to feed Africa. I want to find ways to develop tourism and travel in Africa. And then you start almost with what are you trying to solve and work your way backwards. What skills do you need in order to equip a student to go solve that problem? And that is very appealing to students because when I was 18, I switched my major probably 12 times. And I, someone was laughing. Someone said, when did you know what you really wanted to do? And I said, yesterday, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know because it evolves. But if you're a kid who's 8 years old and says, I want to be a physician, that is fantastic. If you are the average kid who's 20 years old, you're thinking, man, maybe I want to run a business. Maybe I want to be work in television. You don't know what you want to do. And so then what you do is you have to kind of start backwards and say, okay, if you think you want to go into this area, what skills do you need? I had a kid wanted to be an urban planner. And so what I did is worked with some colleagues throughout the university, and we came up with the courses that student needed to be an urban planner.
Oh, interesting.
And so it's almost starting by saying, what do you want? Again, I go back to personalization, and we can do this with AI. And the irony, this is one of the things that small institutions can outdo big institutions on, because they can say we have the time and the personalization ability to say, what do you want to do with your life? Let me give you the skills you need to do it.
This is the second time I heard African Leadership University. The first is Brian Rosenberg, the author of, he wrote the book, Whatever It Is, I'm Against It, Change in Higher Education. And because I think he's on the board there or something like that. And I thought immediately about that, how, coming back to your point about change, where the best example that I ever see is I want to serve the adult learner. We're a traditional institution. Right. We're going to serve the adult learner, and we're going to do it on a standard term schedule. All right. Most people know if you serve an adult learner, they ain't going to wait 2 or 3 months to enroll at your school. They're not. Right. So you have to have frequency of start date. Well, that frequency of start date, you might have to look at non-standard term. To look at non-standard term, you have to go to your faculty and say, update the curriculum non-standard term. The faculty comes back and says, cannibalization. I don't want my students to go over to that program version. The word cannibalization in higher education is one that's interesting for me because it's almost like saying we have the iPhone 16 and we're selling right now the iPhone 15. We don't want people to go buy the new iPhone. We want to sell them the old version. And that's what prevents higher ed from changing, is that we hold on to the old versions of things because we're nervous about, I think we're nervous about our jobs. I think we're all nervous about losing jobs. And this is the first time to come back to the point that we made at the beginning. It's all kind of coming back around in a circle. And it's because of the lack of change sometimes that we ended up here.
People are entrenched and probably they've never experienced change in higher ed. I mean, really catastrophic change. And when you talk about a board and management saying, we're going to close in 2 years, holy smokes, you have their attention. But nobody likes to change if they don't have to. And we've been living in this lovely, complacent world where everything is the same and nothing ever changes. And, the ostrich heads are in the sand because everything is fine. It's good. It'll blow over. And you know what? It's not going to blow over. And the only ones that, and it's very hard to get anybody to change without getting them really mobilized and galvanized to change. And because change is really uncomfortable. Yeah. And I acknowledge it is. There are a few sick, twisted Twinkies who love change. It's about 5% of the population, maybe 10. And they probably had a good experience with change. And they're like, hey, this is kind of exciting. Little ADHD. I'm going to, I think this is really fun. I have to say I'm one of them. But I know how to deal with it.
Surprise.
Yeah. I know how to deal with it. But if you have never experienced this before, you're like a deer in headlights. And then on top of that, probably 80% of the change that you're going to undergo in higher ed is going to be terrible because they've never done it either. So it's catastrophic. It really is. And then you have boards. I'm going back to boards again. You have boards that probably have never had to undergo these kind of changes. They aren't making leadership accountable, and I had this discussion last night with a group of people, CEO of a large company in town, and we were saying that we think part of the reason why academic boards and nonprofit boards act the way they do, they're not paid. It's
Right.
seen as kind of a perk to, oh, this is really nice. I'm a successful alumni. I'm going to be on the board. Isn't it nice? It looks good. And I'm giving back. Well, you know what? That's not what they need. They need someone there to push leadership to say, is this the right direction? And leadership doesn't really want that because that's a pain in the neck. So, so then you have boards that are not engaged and truly managing the process. And, I have one faculty member, and if he hears this, he'll know exactly who he is. He is a thorn in my side. He drives me nuts. But I'll tell you, we make better decisions when he is in the room. He is in the room. I call this group of employees disruptors. They make decisions. They don't do them based on what's good for them. This is not about personal gain for them. This is, I am going to sit and make you justify the decisions you do for the betterment of the organization. They tend to have terrible people skills, and they tend to be really awkward. But you know what? You make better decisions when you have them in the room. And politically inept, totally politically inept.
Yep.
But you make better decisions when they're in the room. And no one wants them on their board if you can avoid it. If you're a college president having a rough time,
your life is miserable if you just because they're going to question everything. Yeah.
Exactly. So you get them off the board as fast as you can. And that is to the detriment of the institution.
Douglas, any final questions for Nancy before we wrap it up?
Yeah, and I think it might even be a little bit of a summary of the conversation, but for, if you let's say a board member, and hopefully they are listening to this podcast, what would be your advice, specifically if they're in a place that's a little bit more turbulent? What should they be thinking about? What are some of the tools at their disposal? What advice would you give them that, and the answer doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, here's the things that'll save your school. Part of the advice might be, hey, think about how to wind down. And those are both fine answers, but I'm just curious, what advice would you give to boards of a school that may be having to make some hard decisions?
Great question. I would say do your homework. Know who you're competing against. Understand your institution like you're the CEO, and go do homework, go dig around, understand your fiduciary duty and your duty of care to that institution. And a lot of people don't, because boards aren't trained. People tend not to train higher ed boards, and they should be trained. They should understand what their job is on that board. And they should take the same level of care as if they're on I was serving on a quoted company board. I asked for every piece of document they had submitted to the SEC in the past year before I joined the board. I read it all. I would imagine most higher ed boards don't do that. Board members don't do that. You have an obligation to those students to do what is in the best interest of those students. And you know what? You've got to follow that. It's important. There's an obligation, I feel, a moral obligation to those students who are looking at you to ensure that the management of the institution is doing the best they can and is up for the job.
Final question. What's next for Dr. Nancy Hubbard?
Well, so I am leaving the institution. I'm leaving sadly because I love this place, but I am leaving here at the end of June. I have, because this is all on very short notice, it's funny. I've decided I have an unusual skill set in that I am a person, again, who has fired many people and worked in strategy for a long time before going back to higher ed as a dean. So I am going to start consulting on these issues to try to help institutions, coach presidents, and help with the process of finding the information out on what you should be doing in terms of strategy, implementation, and if there is right sizing involved, helping on that. So the company is called Higher Ed Transformation, and the email is higheredtransformation@gmail.com. We have no webpage yet because this is really still new. But I've talked to a couple of retired colleagues who have related skill sets in other areas and disciplines, and they're keen to start doing this. And I really want to feel like I'm doing something to help students. If we can help their institutions do better, we're helping students.
amazing.
Well, I know somebody, me and Elvin, we know a lot of people in higher ed. Nancy, we'll stay in touch and see what we can do to help you out and see if we can supercharge your business, because we love, Elvin and I, we talked, we feel we're actually talking over, I was having a non-alcoholic beverage. Elvin was having many alcoholic beverages. Don't tell him I said so. But we feel it's our goal and mission to help restore the trust in higher education. We have this platform, this media platform across the industry. So if we can connect you with anyone that needs your help, I would hire you in an instant. Douglas, I don't know what you feel, but this has been one of the best episodes we've probably done together. It's just a great.
It's been the most absolutely real episode about what's actually going on in higher education. We've had lots of good ones, but too many of them have been like, oh, let's talk about our wonderful programs. Like, no, let's talk about like the nitty gritty.
Right.
Well, we appreciate it. We appreciate it. And we'll stay in touch. Everyone, my guest co-host, you know him, you love him, maybe. I love him. I'm going to see him next week. Where are we going to be, Douglas? I'm actually going to be podcasting with Lead Squared. Am I not?
You sure are. Yeah, we're going to be live at CQ, getting the other end of higher education, the proprietary / for-profit market, which there's a lot to be learned from both sides of the house.
Wow.
Yes, sir. And you're going to be co-hosting with me live.
I sure am.
Well, how do you like that? He's Douglas Carlson. He's the head of partnerships at Lead Squared. He connects people with people who do business or something along those lines. We're going to refine that in person. We're going to come up with something. And she's our guest today. She's your guest today. She's Dr. Nancy Hubbard. She's currently the dean of the College of Business at the University of Lynchburg and soon to be the most amazing consultant out there helping higher ed boards and presidents. Nancy, it's been such a pleasure and honor to host you today.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this, probably too much.
Yeah. No such thing here at the EdUp Experience. We want you to enjoy it.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, everybody. You've just EdUp'd.